issues, and I tell people that, you know, selfishly so, as a black woman, obviously, but that that my way of dealing with my passions is not the same as my father's. But I also know that being the daughter of has opened doors for me that might not otherwise have been opened. That, you know, people have been willing to listen to me because I'm Naomi Tutu, who might not be willing to listen to Naomi Smith without knowing anything else about her. And so that has been a big opportunity for me, is that the doors that have been opened, my opportunities to meet some amazing people, world leaders in our generation, that I have had, as I said in my presentation today, I've had the opportunity to spend time with President Nelson Mandela, to spend time with the Dalai Lama, to spend time with Rigoberta Menchú, with Jody Williams, all these different Nobel Peace Prize winners. And also, it has the opportunity to be at the making of history, if you like, that once my father was named, for instance, the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I had the opportunity to sit at table and share meals with political leaders from South Africa, with leaders from Latin American countries that had had truth commissions. I had the opportunity to be in the offices of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when they were having discussions about policies and how they were going to move forward. I had the opportunity to meet personally some of those who came to give their testimonies. So, myriad of opportunities, definitely.
You mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Could you describe for us what that is and what the outcome was intended to be, and did the intended outcome, was it achieved?
Well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was actually a compromise in South Africa's transition to democracy. That once it became clear that apartheid was going to be ended, then there were the negotiated settlements about how we would move forward. And there were those who believed that what South Africa needed to do was just wipe the slate clean and forgive and forget, they said, and let's, you know, step out into a new future and just grant a blanket amnesty for all those who had committed any atrocities. And then there were those who said, you know, the level of human rights abuses that had occurred under apartheid was so horrendous that the only thing that we could do would be to hold style trials. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a kind of a midpoint, whereby there was decision that there would not be trials, but there would be amnesty applications, and that it would not be a blanket amnesty, that each individual had to apply for amnesty for their acts. But if they received amnesty, they would receive total amnesty. And in order to receive amnesty, all they had to do was to tell the truth and to show that there was some political motivation for their action. And the other part of the commission was then to hear the stories of those who were victims and survivors of the human rights abuses. And the process lasted for over 3 years, both in hearing the stories of those who were victims and survivors, and in hearing the amnesty applications of those who were perpetrators of human rights abuses. And it was people who, the political motivation could either be to maintain apartheid or to overthrow apartheid. So there were applications from people in the government, but also people in the liberation movements. And I think it was the first time. It was not a perfect commission, but I think that it did fulfill a number of needs that I think we had as a new country. One, it was, I think for me, one of the primary was to hear all the stories of what happened under apartheid, to hear all the stories of the level of atrocity, the level of dehumanization, the level of torture and evil that happened in that system. But also to hear the stories of greatness, of people who stood up to apartheid, and people who were willing to forgive, but not forget, I think it is important. And I think it definitely started us as a country on a path of reconciliation. It gave us a fresh start in a way that I don't think trials would have. And my experience is that looking at other places around the world, that it did stop us, I think, from a cycle of vengeance that I have seen in so many places of the world where retribution is the response to a violence or dehumanization or oppression. Yeah.
What lessons do you think that the United States may be able to learn from that process?
Well, I think the biggest one is the one that I spoke about at the beginning of the lesson of hearing all the stories and integrating the whole story of what happened in our country into our knowledge of ourselves as a nation, so that we knew that it was South Africans who abused and tortured. And we also knew that it was South Africans who stood up against it. And so the integration of the great as well as the evil into our whole story of South Africa, I think, is something that is lacking in much of the history in this country.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and kind of talk about what you're doing now. One of the things that you're doing, you're co-authoring a book, and the book is, I guess the working title is I Don't Think of You as Black, Honest Conversations on Race and Racism. Could you tell us how that book came about?
Well, that book, the title comes, and the book came about from a conversation that I had with Rose, who is a friend of mine. At that time, we were just beginning to want to start working together, and we were working particularly around women's issues and trying to set up a women's retreat. And I happened to say to her one time about working with, her feelings about working with a black woman. And her response was, I don't think of you as black. And my response to that statement, I think, took her aback a little bit, in that, I responded very strongly as somebody who had heard that statement in different ways, growing up, people saying, oh, you're very articulate for a black person, or you're not like other black people, or, how come you're so educated? That, the idea that that there is something not black about being educated, articulate, or well-spoken, all of those things. And so, so my response to her was, what does that mean? What does that statement mean? And let me tell you what I hear when I hear a statement like that. And that started a conversation for us about